How will we address the climate crisis? Climate One with Greg Dalton brings together advocates, influencers, and policymakers in empowering conversations that connect all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic, the scary and the exciting, to help you understand the most critical issue of our time. Because addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
The lack of affordable housing has contributed to a homelessness crisis and has forced people to move farther away from urban centers. That increases car travel and climate-disrupting emissions. Yet building multi-story apartments in urban cores usually cost more per square foot than 1 or 2 story houses where land is cheaper. In California, a historic undersupply of housing has led to soaring prices and an increasing number of people without homes. And it's not just California. Cities across the country are facing a housing crisis. Berkeley Vice Mayor Ben Bartlett and Land Use Attorney Jennifer Hernandez agree we need to make housing easier to build. But how and where? Addressing climate, equity, and the housing crisis all at the same time. Today on Climate One. Your family has lived in Berkeley since the 1800s. And you originally got involved in local politics and made housing your issue when your mother was evicted. What was your reaction when that happened, and how does that inform the work you do today?
I was living my life as a normal young person in Berkeley, having fun, and then all of a sudden, my mother and her friends lived in a house with a bunch of seniors, retired school teachers. They were all victimized by their landlord, who was prepping the building for development. And so they turned the water off, the heat off. It was a very intense situation of economic eviction. They damaged their cars, all things you read about, all the horror stories. And when they left, I was like, okay, we'll just have them go to senior housing. And then I saw there was no senior housing. The wait list for senior housing, I was told, was 14 to 17 years. And I didn't quite understand. I was like, wait, this is America, right? These are taxpayers. They've they've done their duty, and now there's nowhere for them to go. So at that moment, I realized that there was a thing called a housing crisis, and there's also an economic crisis and a crisis of disrespect of our people. So I decided to get involved and address some of these issues.
Jennifer, your father, and I believe both of your grandfathers, were steel workers in Pittsburgh, California, where you grew up. How did your upbringing shape your understanding of the relationship between jobs and housing?
Sure. So we had grandfathers, everybody in town mostly had good union jobs. And one of the things that came with in America was the opportunity to buy a small home. And that small home became a piggy bank, because every month paying even a modest amount of mortgage was paying in part to your own family's equity. And the housing crisis really hit first for both grandmothers, who spent each almost 20 years as widows with no income, and then for my dad, who was laid off permanently from his job at age 56. It was the fact that they owned their house outright that allowed my sister to stay in college, my younger sister, and ultimately has provided for their old age. That's the American dream. Home ownership was affordable in Pittsburgh. Our family could have never afforded to live in Berkeley. There are different levels of affordability. And for me, housing is very much about respecting an all of the above and all of us strategy. And all of us isn't necessarily going to entice a construction worker, which we need more of, to be content living in someone else's backyard cottage. And any effort to make one size fits all leaves out people like my dad and my grandparents and my brother and my nephew, who are still in the trades. So it's time to be respectful, and that's respectful of both economic and color lines.
Ben, Berkeley was one of the first cities to implement single-family zoning shortly after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down racial zoning as unconstitutional. They just rebranded it. Now Berkeley's housing element or housing plan commits the famously liberal city to address its historic underinvestment in communities of color. Will that really happen?
Yes. It will. And it's important to realize, too, housing is the fulcrum of the economic health of a society, because you can live in high-resource areas, your house itself can become a source of wealth, and there are good schools and good jobs nearby. So in Berkeley, we are, of course, the home of single-family zoning, or exclusionary zoning, or race zoning, as I call it.
Which is kind of shocking for a city that's known to be so liberal. That was new to me, learning from you.
Right. Well, there's a reason why Berkeley is home of the countercultures, because they were reacting to the dominant paradigm at the time, which was hardcore elite conservatism. So the Berkeley radicals were butting up against the power structure. And that structure still exists, as we heard earlier. They're landowners. They may be liberal in politics, but they are still the landowning elite. And it's land hoarding is what we're talking about here. So when you have a time frame where you have extreme wealth inequality, and we talk about people hoarding wealth, you think of stocks and bonds, money, but really land is wealth. And when one group of people has all the land, and you see the result, the cascading poverty throughout the state of California and the country and the world, you have to address it. So in Berkeley, we're also the home of the Fair Housing Act, which addressed these same issues in the 60s and 70s. And so now we have this buttress to really change all the zoning and allow people to just have smaller apartments and duplexes and things in wealthy areas, and therefore achieve, hopefully, and I believe we will, economic and racial diversity in these high-resource neighborhoods.
But when you say duplexes and density in wealthy areas, they hear black people, they hear color, right? That's code for like, oh, right? I mean, right? So are those wealthy areas in Berkeley going to accept more density when they've somewhere, whether they acknowledge it or not, that means scary people?
Yeah. Well, look, here's the thing. The generation below mine, the millennials, is the largest generation in human history. They dwarf the baby boomers, and they're out here because the older generation above them has not expanded the portfolio of infrastructure from housing, education, healthcare. You see these student loans out of control, the healthcare, the housing, even arable land, even food. And so all across the world, you have one crisis of affordable housing in every county in the country and also around the world. And homelessness now, I was in a meeting with some Republicans in Missouri who asked me for advice about the fact they had 250 homeless encampments in their suburb of Kansas City. So it's everywhere. So this is a matter of survival of the economy. You can have that many people at the gates, but you will not stay in the castle very long. So it's a necessary function if you want to have a holistic society with your children able to live here and your company able to have workers remain here. You have to expand the portfolio. And also, there's another economic lesson here as well. As people get older, their physical imprint shrinks, but their house is still big. And we know that senior care is super expensive, so a better way for them is to downsize the house, keep a portion of it to live in, and make money off the rest by opening up to other people. So there's an economic incentive that I think will be persuasive in the end.
So Jennifer, your thoughts on sort of the class and race part of this, because what I hear where Ben's saying a little bit is boomers haven't done so well in what they're leaving behind. I did a whole interview once about how boomers are kind of sociopaths, and you know, they started off as some of the most liberal progressives in Berkeley, right? Going to save the world, hippies, and they became some of the greediest people around. So your take on that?
Yeah, so I am a boomer, and I'm at the bottom edge, which means we got educated about drugs to do and not do, which was a benefit, right? Other people learned about it. And certainly from Pittsburgh, I owe my scholarships to Harvard and Stanford to those who came before in the civil rights movement and in the kind of counterculture and women's rights movements. California, according to the Air Resources Board, development is 6% of our 100 million acre state. Other states that have any kind of normal population, Alaska would be an exception, are about 10 to 12% developed. New Jersey is 35% developed. It's, everyone knows, easier to build new in a way that is entirely sustainable. Net zero for greenhouse gas, the most water and energy conserving structures that we know how to build are the current building codes. The idea that climate change means we have to reject the 7% solution 1 million new acres even in California, built on existing infrastructure, designed to be sustainable, absolutely walkable, that is a conceit held here as dogma in the name of the environment, and it's another baby boomer mistake.
But help me understand where that's going to be, because there's something called the wildland-urban interface, which is a lot of places like Paradise, California, places up against the foothills, wooded, beautiful, that with our new climate reality are fire zones. And some people say we shouldn't be building there, and even the people that shouldn't rebuild there. So if we're going to spread out further, isn't that going right into the fire zone and danger zone when we go up against the Sierra foothills? Where's this going to happen?
So you skipped a few places in order to get to the Sierras. A lot of Marin right now is being used to graze cows, which have their own greenhouse gas emission profile.
Yeah.
Adding 50,000 people to Marin is a heck of a lot better for the climate than grazing cows. But it's an aesthetic.
Yep.
That we won't add people to Marin. It's a baby boomer prejudice.
Well,
and it's not about the environment.
It's also racial prejudice. I have a place in West Marin.
I completely agree with you there. I wrote a piece called Green Jim Crow about the use of environmental law to promote racism.
Ben, what do you think? Would you rather have, and this is not either or binary, maybe it's and, but the trade-off between more densely populated cities like Berkeley or, building out?
It's both. I mean, we need the whole portfolio, and you make excellent points too. I got to say, so we need the urban centers, of course, because that's where the most heightened human activity is in the world. That's where the healthiest, the wealthiest, most opportunities. It's the place.
And low carbon footprint.
And low carbon footprint, of course, and a place that traditionally people of non-majority status have done well. And then we also need to expand elsewhere as well, because I mean, looking at the state of the state, we have more than 100,000 homeless people. We have a burgeoning workforce that is leaving the state. And we have so many people commuting so far, living in their cars. We've got to address the whole panoply.
And I was listening to something the other day about how Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii have some of the high liberal blue states. Maybe it's the climate, also have some of the highest percentages of unhoused people. Now, I'm not saying that's causation. Maybe it's correlation more than causation. But what is it about these liberal states, Jennifer, that are failing?
Well, I do think we have our view of our personal environment that is deserving of protection from them. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty expansive view of the, quote, environment.
Hang on to my little piece of paradise.
Well, and I grew up in a highly polluted town. I know the environment for when it's dirty. It's no longer dirty. We like to think of it as still catastrophic. It's no longer catastrophic. We have done a tremendous job cleaning up air and water. We have done a tremendous job preserving our best natural environments. But the idea, I'll stay with Marin because it's my favorite, that we can't take 1,000 acres of Marin and put a bunch of people who would otherwise have to live in Tracy is anti-environment. And it is not climate friendly, sorry, to put people in a bunch of steel high-rises from material imported from around the globe to build incredibly complex structures that are incredibly costly to run. We don't have a one-size-fits-all climate solution. We can have all kinds of, frankly, cleaner transportation solutions. We could have solved air pollution by taking cars away and saying people can only live in a one-bedroom apartment. Think about that in 1970. If your parents or you were told, yeah, sorry, we're going to take your car away and we're going to make you live in a one-bedroom apartment, so much for the 3 kids. I mean, there is a point at which we've taken the environment and now climate into this very myopic, very, from my perspective at least, unshared by any place in the world, except maybe some European capitals. And people are like, I'm not going to be a welder or a teacher here and live in someone's backyard cottage for my whole life. Are you serious? I'm moving to Phoenix. And there's a lot of people in California who are like, great, bye. Over our holding capacity, happy to see you go. And that anti-growth, degrowth philosophy, which is a part of the climate movement, is as racist from my perspective as the original Green Jim Crow.
Yeah, definitely degrowth is a thing. Ben, how do you see that in terms of, what Jennifer just said?
Yeah, well, one thing around the homelessness issue in these blue cities and the overall wealth stratification in these same cities being so obscene, I think a lot of this is human psychology at work, where that which you attack, you secretly are. So liberals like to call conservatives cruel and mean, when in actuality, if you look at it, they are social Darwinists. You can have a liberal person walk by someone literally dying on the street in front of them, and they're okay, they're liberal. This is freedom, right? They're not admitting it, but they're saying this person is free to live and die on their own merit right now, which is conservative. Now, another element is that here in California, we talk about how Ronald Reagan, 50 years ago, stopped funding social housing, stopped funding mental health care. And that's been 50 years. And in 50 years, this state has become the wealthiest place in the history of humanity. And our liberal leadership has not taken steps to correct that action from 50 years ago and still complain about it. So I think a lot of these labels just aren't helpful. These are fundamental human values at play, and the fulcrum is housing.
And you've talked about intergenerational warfare. I know we touched about this a little bit, but you describe what's happening in desirable neighborhoods as intergenerational warfare. How so?
There's this movie Tenet, a sci-fi film, came out recently. It's a very talky movie, but there's a line in there which sticks out. It's when the main character is asked, why do you think the people in the future are trying to kill us? Because they're at war with the future. And he says, well, that's how it is. It's every generation out for themselves. So, right now we are all, at least my generation and below, are in a defensive trench hole position, fending off attacks from the older generation. And for instance, my old boss went to law school. I think he paid $15,000, right? You wouldn't even know what my student loans are. Multiple six figures. Everything that they got when the getting was good, they locked up and kept for themselves. It's almost like the 10 families that own some third world country. We're replicating that, where this 1%, as we call it, but it's really a different kind of number, controls all the resources and makes you fight to death to get your share of it. Case in point, California is 49 out of 50 for homeownership. That's ridiculous. And at the same time, that generation is spending untold money through private equity and investment to buy up every single family house in the country. They want to make the whole population below them into subscribers and not owners. So this is economic warfare.
And owning a house is the way that most, certainly since World War II, the biggest source of family wealth, the biggest way that families accumulate wealth. So you're saying that it's concentration more and more on top, and the people are going to be subscribers and never owners.
Right, and the trends involve, artificial intelligence, decimating white-collar work, so on. Automated transportation is coming as well. So the complete decimation of the transportation sector, job-wise. So you have this dystopian future that they're dedicated to making happen, where most of us are surviving on pennies, paying rent, owning nothing, and liking it.
And you're saying it's been blue-collar displacement, but white-collar people, they're coming for you. You're not safe anymore.
Right. They're not safe at all. They're done.
At all.
If you've used ChatGPT, you see it coming.
Yeah.
In the next 4 years, in our immediate lifetime, you'll begin to see the economic system begin to unravel. So we're in it right now. And so for me, this battle is existential because, my family, we escaped slavery. And, our motto is never again. And these conditions that housing, again, being the fulcrum on, is setting the stage for a return to servitude. And it's not acceptable, so we have to join this fight.
Jennifer?
Yeah, so I think that you've opened my eyes to still more badness.
Thank you, Ben, for coming.
But, while all you youngsters have been suffering out of sight for my generation, we've been chasing gremlins. There's a law professor who calls procedural perfectionism, a new value that is overwhelmed all other values. So CEQA is about, the California Environmental Quality Act, is about procedural perfection. Have you studied everything, including stuff we don't even know we have to study, to the nth degree, to the satisfaction of a 62-year-old judge who majored in social studies and is a conservative white homeowner? And if not, go back and do it again. But you wonder about your $1 million per door cost, and it's value-based decisions, standard-based decisions, and process-based over legalism that has created a policy suite in California that isn't replicated even in the rest of the country. It's choices we've made.
So,
and we need
what's
to
the
be
solution?
bolder about working together across the generational lines to break it down.
So Jennifer, what's the solution? California.
It's totally simple. We need to join the rest of America in designing and regulating homes to 4 times median income. It's a magic number. If your median priced home is no more than 4 times your median income of households, you have a healthy housing market. And the median income changes depending on where you are in California, but it's roughly $80,000 to $120,000. Californians make a lot more than the rest of the country. But we need to build policies around what we can afford, not what each special interest decides they want and has enough political clout to enforce.
We know that California's vehicle miles traveled is one carbon metric that's going the wrong direction. Most of California's climate things.
I'm sorry, I completely disagree.
You're okay with
It's not a carbon metric. We're doing EV vehicles. We went from less than 5 miles per gallon when I grew up to now more than 50 miles a gallon in a hybrid vehicle that can go as long a distance as a regular car. And we're moving to EV vehicles. Transportation does not equate to terrible climate outcomes. Transportation
It's the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So Ben, how you doing here in between 2 bougie boomers? You know.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm feeling it because I've said this before at council. Again, and I work in innovation in my day job, so I kind of have a pulse on what's coming. So the whole notion of commuting is going to be altered by basically these robotic cars that serve entire neighborhoods. They'll just be cruising all the time. You'll share a car with people, or you want me to drive. The cars will be electric and hydrogen.
Sounds like a dystopian hell of traffic jam.
Well, that part will be fine because they'll be in sync.
So Jennifer, what about the areas that are already urbanized with commercial to have a little more housing there? There's already traffic, transit perhaps. Isn't that part of the solution?
Well, it's been part of the solution and zoned as part of the solution now for more than a decade. We already have a number of streamlining laws on the books that reduce some of the hurdles to getting that developed. There's just a little problem, which is the pro forma, the actual budget, because those properties, especially in a high wealth community like Silicon Valley, are earning a lot of income. And when you think about buying them, you need to buy them at a price which makes sense for the owners
For the revenue stream
who are
that
going
they're
to give up that income stream. And then you have to put $1 million per apartment buildings on them and hope that you can find enough now, in that case, probably $8,000 a month renters. Because we're not buying or building anything at scale at home ownership. It's all rental apartments. And so the fact is, and that's before you add the 20% inclusionary for mixed income, the fact is those projects haven't penciled. If they did, they'd be being built.
Ben, you seem to be questioning capitalism, the kind of private equity buying up homes, the kind of hyper-capitalism, which is very different. Let's be honest, hyper-capitalism today, is it serving us well?
Well, it's actually like hyper-financialism. So we have here now. It's the Wall Streetification of stuff. Because, capitalism is neutral. It's like electricity, right?
It's a set of contracts.
Yeah, it can heat your home or it can fry you in an electric chair, right? Electricity is power. Capitalism is a very efficient means of harnessing human power. And it drives innovation, it drives cooperation, it pushes excellence and increases growth. And there's no question that American capitalism at least our American form of moneynomics, has led to the greatest prosperity in human history for most of the world, too. And every year it gets better than the one before. So I do think, like everything else, capitalism needs to constantly be modulated and cause to challenge itself, cause to grow, because right now our ecosystem is on the verge of collapse. They're saying that we're going to lose half of all species in the next 40 years. So we need to just put some new incentives here so we can put our energies into something that will cause benefit to the world.
So Jennifer, balancing capitalism and environment and human nature.
You know, there's that whole golden rule thing. It's simple, stupid. It works for me. I think it actually works more broadly, and it has been an underpinning of American capitalism before it became Wall Streetification. I love that phrase, because the idea that you could do financial manipulations at a level that brings down the global economy by playing around with secondary mortgage markets, that's not inherent in capitalism. Capitalism is working hard, being able to save money, buy a house, raise your kids, and hopefully have the next generation do better than you are. So a little bit of return of the golden rule and frankly of civil rights. We've managed to park civil rights underneath some weird environmental justice only prioritization, which is an important part of civil rights. But what about upward mobility? What about equal opportunity? What about respect for people who didn't go to college and don't work on a keyboard, that do work with their hands, that we rely on every day?
And we need a lot of those people to electrify things, and we need a lot of electricians in this country, in this state, that we don't have people to work with their hands.
And where are they going to live? So it comes to housing as the fulcrum. I like that a lot.
Back to Pittsburgh and the steel workers. Ben Bartlett and Jennifer Hernandez, thank you so much for joining us here on Climate 1. Let's give them a round.